we're back. In the previous video, we took a deep dive into how electricity works. We discovered that when electricity is injected into the grid by energy generators, it can't be delivered directly to you. We also learned that system operators need to work non-stop to maintain a real-time balance between the electricity produced by generators and consumed by homes and businesses. And they do this because without this perfect balance, the grid can fail and cause blackouts. This real-time balance covers the entire grid. So an energy producer in Queensland can inject electricity into the grid to cover the needs of customers of a retailer based down in Victoria. Now here's the kicker. Because there's no way to physically track electricity once it's been injected into the grid, whether from renewable sources or coal-fired power plants, businesses need a system that verifies the power they paid for. And this system is called Energy Attribute Certificates. And it's been around since the 90s. An Energy Attribute Certificate is an electronic document that certifies when and where 1 megawatt hour of power was injected into the grid and how it was produced. Sorry, hang on, what's a megawatt hour? Fair question. A megawatt measures the power or capacity of an electric system, and a megawatt hour refers to how much of that is delivered through that system in an hour. With a megawatt hour of power, you can run 2 fridges for a year, drive an electric car 5,794 kilometres, or 6.5 Melbourne to Sydney round trips, power an Aussie home for about 2 months, or toast 89,000 slices of bread. That's a lot of toast. Yeah, it is. Okay, so an Energy Attribute Certificate could certify that a solar farm in, say, New South Wales produced 1 megawatt of electricity in January. Think of it as an electronic ID for electricity. You could create an Energy Attribute Certificate for any source of energy. Like you could have a certificate for 1 megawatt hour of coal-fired power, but in practice, they're only really used to account for electricity that was produced from renewable sources. And so we call them renewable energy certificates. Different regions and countries have various mechanisms in place. In North America, they call them RECs. In Europe, they're called Guarantee of Origin. In the rest of the world, they're referred to as IRECs, International Renewable Energy Certificates. The names are different, but the principles remain the same. Just like North America, in Australia, we also call them Renewable Energy Certificates. And we split them into 2 types, LGCs and STCs. STCs are small-scale technology certificates for small generation units like small-scale solar panels, solar hot water, and micro hydroelectricity systems, typically up to 100 kilowatts. LGCs are large-scale generation certificates, and these are for larger-scale projects such as wind and solar farms and hydroelectric schemes, pretty much anything over 100 kilowatts. Wind and solar farms receive revenue from LGCs over time, but STCs are received up front. This is mainly because it wouldn't really be viable for smaller systems like household rooftop solar to report their generation over time to receive LGC certificates. Majority of the time, businesses use LGCs that are generated by large-scale renewables. So we'll focus on LGCs in these videos. Yeah, okay, that's good to know. So how do businesses get these certificates? Is there a market out there for them? Yeah, there sure is. Certificates like LGCs are created and owned by the producer who injected electricity into the grid. They then sell these certificates or trade them to anyone in Australia. Each certificate is completely independent from the actual power delivered. So a producer can trade the power to a retailer and the certificate to another retailer. LGCs need to be created within the same year the power was generated. They are then valid for several years and inevitably need to be retired. Once someone buys a certificate, they can say that the electricity allocated to them is from a zero emissions source. The certificate is then surrendered to the Clean Energy Regulator. This is so it can't be used by anyone else. Ah, right, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So that's how you connect energy use with renewable sources. Yep. Now, there are 2 main reasons why businesses buy LGCs in Australia. The first reason is legislation. Back in 2001, Australia adopted the Renewable Energy Target to encourage the generation of renewable electricity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Under this target, all retailers and large buyers who participate in the electricity market are required to buy a certain number of certificates each year, depending on the volume of electricity that they acquire. And this is called their liability. The renewable energy target was set to inject 43,000 gigawatt hours under the Julia Gillard Prime Ministership. But after Tony Abbott was elected, he reduced it to 33,000 gigawatt hours by 2020, or 23.5% of Australia's electricity at the time. He also removed Australia's carbon pricing scheme. The target was actually achieved in 2019, 1 year earlier than expected. The scheme will continue until 2030, but unfortunately without an increase in the percentage of renewables between 2020 to 2030. Climate change advocates are campaigning to increase this percentage and extend it well beyond 2030, because we need to do a lot better than 23%. Oh, definitely, for sure. Okay, so businesses buy large-scale generation certificates or LGCs for compliance obligations and also to claim that they're 100% renewable, yeah? That's right. Buying LGCs allows companies to claim that the electricity they're purchasing is 100% renewable. For example, in 2021, Coles announced that they'll buy certificates from various wind and solar farms in Australia. And this is part of their ambitions to use only 100% renewable electricity by 2025. The renewable energy certificate mechanism is a credible way for companies to certify that they are using 100% renewable sources. Okay, all right. But just to be crystal clear, the electricity that Coles is using doesn't come directly from renewables, right? Yes, except for the electricity that they generate themselves from solar panels they have on the roofs of their stores. All other electricity that powers Coles supermarkets is the exact same electricity that powers every other supermarket, business and home in Australia. The catch is that they have renewable electricity attributes allocated to them, so Coles can legally make a claim that they are powered by electricity that does not cause climate pollution. When they calculate the impact of their electricity use, they are certified to assign a value of 0 emissions to their electricity. But in reality, their physical emissions and the emissions of Australia as a whole remain the same. Well, hang on. Remains the same? Are you saying that buying certificates doesn't actually reduce emissions? Like, isn't that the point of all of this? Yes. Reducing emissions is 100% the end goal here. Buying certificates each year promotes renewable energy by increasing the revenue of wind and solar farms, but it doesn't directly support investment in new wind and solar farms. And building new renewable projects to replace old fossil generators really is the key to reducing our emissions. But if more businesses are purchasing renewable energy certificates, doesn't that help build new solar and wind farms? Sort of. Each certificate is attached to the energy generator that produced it, so that means that the revenue goes directly to them. But it helps because it makes renewable energy generators more profitable, which then encourages more investment in new renewable projects. Also, if all the LGCs that are created by generators end up being sold to businesses who want to claim their electricity is 100% renewable, then that could lead to more demand and therefore more capacity that needs to be built. However, investors in solar and wind farms require a lot more certainty than the short-term increases in LGC prices. After all, they're committing tens of millions of dollars to these projects. So yeah, sadly, LGC purchasing is fairly indirect and often a weak market signal. Whoa, okay, so this is a lot to take in. But if I understand this correctly, large-scale generation certificates are good for tracing and proving renewable purchasing, but buying them as you go doesn't really accelerate the transition to renewables. Is that right? Bingo. Huh. Okay. How much are businesses paying for LGCs? The cost of LGCs is determined by supply and demand. So the price is negotiated between buyers and sellers. It's been as low as an additional 2 cents a kilowatt hour or a 10% premium on electricity. And it's also been as high as 8 cents a kilowatt hour or a 40% premium on top of your normal electricity costs. Right now, it's around 4 cents a kilowatt hour and will likely reduce over time. So for a 20% premium, a business can buy the renewable attribute of the electricity they consume and claim to be 100% renewable. Right, okay. So say I'm a business and I want to be 100% renewable. What's the process? Who do I go to buy renewable energy certificates? You have plenty of options, my friend. Sometimes certificates are sold as a package or bundled with the electricity itself. Other times they're sold separately and we call that unbundled. There are some really innovative contracting options out there designed to suit the needs of any business. And we'll cover some of the most common options in future videos. Cool. Okay, so like my business is super committed to being 100% renewable. And so buying LGCs seems like a pretty good way to go for us. But we also want to help reduce emissions. So are there some options that directly help new wind and solar farms get built? Yes, and I'm so glad you asked.
More acronyms.
These are known as corporate power purchase agreements, or corporate PPAs for short. This is where a large energy buyer signs a contract with a new wind or solar farm to buy all or some of its electricity generation at an agreed price for between 7 to 15 years. These contracts exist for large businesses who consume a lot of electricity. To go back to our Coles example before, they use these types of contracts and sign 10 to 15-year agreements with both power generators and retailers to meet their electricity requirements at competitive prices. And the best part is, these agreements help build new renewable projects, and it's truly a win-win.
Radical.